Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started. And as people join us, they join us so that we have as much time for our wonderful conversation today. For those who do not know, I'm Dr. Megan Clark. I'm an associate professor in the theology department here at St. John's University, and I'm the faculty member who's co-chair of our CRS Global Campus committee, along with Victoria O'Keefe, who is my wonderful co-chair. And this is our first event for the 2021-2022 school year. And we are really excited to be participating this year in Founders Week in particular. As we always do, let's begin with prayer and calling ourselves together, and then I will introduce Dr. Chebly, the speaker who's starting, and then after he's done, I'll introduce the three students, all of whom have been in his classes, which is a wonderful bonus for that we did not know when we put this together from the outset. So as we begin, I have taken a prayer to end hunger because Dr. Chebly works for World Food Program, and from Catholic Relief Services prayer resources. O God, you entrusted us with the fruits of all creation so that we might take care of the earth and nourish ourselves with its generosity. You sent us your Son to share your own flesh and blood and to teach us your law of love. Through his death and resurrection, we have formed one human family. Jesus showed great concern for those who had no food. We come before you, O God, aware of the challenges in front of us and the need to open our eyes and see how you see us. Aware that you are calling us to share our blessings with all members of this human family. Through your wisdom, inspire government and business leaders, as well as all citizens of the world, to find just and charitable solutions to end hunger by ensuring that all people enjoy the right to food. Amen. It seemed fitting for our conversation today and for the General Assembly going on and the progress that is being hopefully made and discussed about the Sustainable Development Goals. So we are very lucky to have with us here today Juan Chebly, who's he's a development economist who currently is Strategic Partnerships Officer at the UN World Food Program. He's served as lead advisor to the UN Assistant Secretary General at the UN Environment Program and global coordinator at the UNDP, UN Development Program. Juan also serves as a visiting professor of economics at the Tobin College of Business, frequently teaching, which is how our student panelists all had him in class. At the age of 24, he was the youngest professor at the Tobin College of Business at the time. In 2009, he founded VoIPbox.com, a telecom startup introducing an innovative and pioneering VoIP telephony solutions in South America and the US. Since 2013, he's been tasked to serve in different capacities as a report writer, researcher, program manager, strategic advisor, and community builder at the UN. At the juncture between academic research, climate finance, and inclusive governance, through partnerships and global outreach. He has his doctorate in sustainable development from Universidad Simón Bolívar. He has his MBA from St. John's University and his bachelor's from Université Paris Dauphine. I first encountered Juan as a speaker when St. John's had a poverty conference as the Sustainable Development Goals were being negotiated. And my father, who's also an economist economics professor at Tobin, points and says to me, "You've got to come here, my former student, on how collaborating and how input's being taken for the SDGs. So we are always glad to have Dr. Chebly, who is a valued member of the St. John's family. I'll now turn it over to him, and when he's done speaking about sustainable development and how and why he does what he does, how he got into this and why, I will introduce the three students who will then offer some thoughts and questions.
Thank you, Megan. Wow, that's it's a great honor, and what an introduction. I you know, I think the most valuable thing for me is to be considered part of the family, the St. John's family, because what a family. Believe me, I've traveled the world. I've worked for different organizations, and whether it was on loan or visiting or through partnerships. And I must say that St. John's has a way to keep bringing us back together, and I think that has something to do with the mission, of course, and it's something I am definitely proud, and I'm happy to be with you and support the university in any way, shape, or form. So the pleasure really mine. So thank you for that. And of course, I owe in a way, big way, my career to St. John's and to my professors. Your father certainly has been, a mentor and an inspiration to me. But I was so lucky, to have such a wonderful faculty at Tobin. Father Primo, for example, another great mentor for me, and that's really how I discovered sustainable development. And at the time it was 2008. I was dreaming of investment banking, and I remember having this back and forth with Father Primo, because he certainly had something to say about the financial system at the time, and he had published extensively there. But my passion was always economics, so I would spend more time than I should have, perhaps taking economics courses, where my main my major was actually business. So hence, I had to deal with the three theologies and all of that. And this is where I encountered Primo. And, the one exercise that I tried to replicate with students that really marked me was the fishing exercise, where, we were set up, and, I hope I'm not ruining it for those who haven't taken my class, but, we're set up as small businesses. You could buy small, medium, and large boats. We're set out to maximize profits. That's what business was all about. And then we run the simulation, and we think we are millionaires there at the end of the exercise. And then we learn that, we depleted the fish stock by year 3. So, I think that really made a point with me, and to sort of understand that surely we need economic growth to overcome poverty. And I think that was my main concern coming from Caracas, Venezuela. And soccer was my main motivation to join St. John's, but it didn't take too long for me to discover that there was more to St. John's than athletics. And so here I really came together, was able to combine this interest in economics with social progress, social development, and the environment. I realized, wow, I forgot the environment, said that in a way that same conundrum happened to the leaders of the world in the year 2000, when they came together to draft an agenda for the world. And the environment was sort of like, the stories go that they forgot, they came back, the head of the UNDP, the World Bank, and they came back and they wrote it. And that's why we had 8 Millennium Development Goals as opposed to 7. But it was sort of an afterthought. And my work started in that field, understanding that maybe investment banking was good, but maybe I needed a little more than that. And that's where I pursued my academic career, and I was given fantastic opportunity to teach finance. I think it was 23, but I'm not up to set any records. But yeah, I was pretty young, and I was teaching finance, and it was great. It was that of Goldman Sachs, and I think that I discovered my calling there, and really understood that sharing in the classroom and being part of academia was really my calling. So that's how I ended up at UNDP, really through my PhD internship, if you will. And I was hired to be the data analyst for the Millennium Development Program, the Millennium Development Campaign, which was hosted by UNDP and aiming to push forward that same agenda I just mentioned, the Millennium Development Goals. And what we discovered then was that we had great goals, and we had a fantastic effort from the top down to rally governments behind, halving extreme poverty by the year by the year 2015, and I think at that time I realized that that there was much more to be done in terms of including people, and surely it made sense to have technocrats to backcast and say this is what we need to be in 15 years. How do we get there? Here are some goals, 20, 30 something indicators. Let's get the world behind them. And there were some lessons there for sure. And one of them was we needed to have this effort be bottom up. So how do we engage with people all over the world? So that was really my main task when I joined. And I was looking at all of the data, big data analytics, data collected by the UN, trying to assess what were people's dreams and aspirations. And we were polling people, we were sitting with them one-to-one with the help of our 100 country offices of the UN and regional, even sub-regional focus groups that were organized in partnership with the government. So 100 national consultations. We had a world survey that polled 10 million people across 194 countries. And then on top of that, we had 12 online thematic consultations with academia and experts. So I was, my responsibility was to bring all that together and feed it into the UN General Assembly to straight to the hands of ambassadors, some more reluctant than others, to get the data about what their own citizens were asking for, and ensure that no goal was left out, and to ensure that no one was left behind. And so much did we work for this that one of the main objectives of the Agenda 2030 and the new development agenda of the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, is leaving no one behind. And what better message than that, and how harmonious it is with the mission of St. John's. So little did I know I'll be back teaching, after 10 years. But it's something that you take with you. And at the time, we had to fight. I mean, I used to joke around that it was in a way the same type of Wall Street hours that I was working. But obviously the pay was not the same. So if there's one thing perhaps it has had suffered here overall, was my bank account and my career choice. But not everything is money. And when I look back, I'm really proud of the work because now we have an agenda that is inclusive, that 194 countries have signed up to, and now we have a plan. So we have a roadmap for a better world. And now, of course, it's hardest part is to make that agenda a reality. So that's really where my work transcended that first post at the UNDP, and then went on to work for the UN Environment Program. So what we were doing there is to find the right engagement mechanisms for people to also participate in the environmental agenda, but also to mainstream the environment, not just within and across UN agencies. So, at the time I had to coordinate the work of the 52 UN agencies. I didn't even know that there were so many UN agencies to ensure that strategically they were aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically the environmental aspect of it. So great responsibility there, and then coordinating all the ministers of environment of the world to ensure that we have the right governance, and to ensure that we were addressing biodiversity loss, climate change, and desertification, and so many other problems that the environment is facing. So after that, I think it was the time where Venezuela was in great struggle, and I wanted to be more involved in my own country. And the World Food Program was initiating work to open an office in Caracas. I'm actually calling you from Caracas, and been helping set up, in a way, supporting the country office. But my responsibility really lies with handling the relationship with the World Food Program, facing the international financial institutions around the world. So initially setting up the relationship with the IMF, and we have 80 plus country offices. So how do we engage with the IMF? How do we ensure that that fiscal space is used to ensure we end hunger and malnutrition wherever we can? So it's been a complete journey. I mean, to look back and think that this is my 9th UN General Assembly, it makes me feel a little older than I am. I hope I did I did start quite young, and in many ways I sort of had a career in reverse, because the first UN General Assembly I was in the stage, and I had to brief the Secretary General live, and of course I was the youth sort of advocate at the time and data analyst, and but now I write reports and I write speeches from time to time. But I have certainly traveled the world, and I've taken this message of inclusion, of social responsibility wherever I go. And the beauty of all that is that if you look back and say, well, what is the great legacy of the Sustainable Development Goals? I mean, how did we get there, and did they come in time? You don't have to look too far. Just read a little bit about Pope Leo XIII and his first encyclical. But even if you wanted to go back further, it was 2,000 years ago that we were given the Beatitudes, and just a simple message, the golden rule, right? Love thy neighbor as love thyself, and that's the key, I think. After everything that we put together, all of the policies that we looked at, how can we improve? How can we improve governance? How do we ensure that no one is left behind? Believe me, we have 20,000 employees around the world in the World Food Program alone. We have a estimated budget for this year of $8.4 billion. And if you think that our meals on average cost about 50 cents, I mean, you can think that we're able to disperse a lot of food, serve a lot of people around the world. We disperse something around $2 billion in cash-based transfers, but the challenges are daunting, and for this year we estimated, because of COVID, that we would need about 16 billion to ensure that no one was being sent home without a meal. A great part of our work is serving schools through school feeding or school meals, and it's really moving to see. Sometimes our work at the headquarters or even in New York, at least for me, has been very abstract. So macroeconomist and development economist. I mean, sometimes you don't get to see the fruit of your labor firsthand. But with the World Food Program, it's a bit different, because we work very close to people. We serve beneficiaries directly. So we also have very unique data. So sort of my data experience has come relevant again, trying to assess, how is food inflation being affected by climate change and also climate policy. So we have a systemic issue at hand, which is economic growth that is not sustainable, and then to fix it is quite complex. But I do feel that St. John's gave me the right tools to address this type of issues, to tackle them head on. Of course, I continued my education, but it was really building on top of what the great foundation I had. I used to say that I really started learning when I started the MBA. That's really when maybe I wasn't paying attention as much as I should have during undergrad, but I was lucky to have some of the same professors. But yeah, I think I've been blessed in that way, and I've been able to give my little grain of sand to ensure that the world is a little better. And I think, like I said before, we do have a plan. Goal 2, ending hunger, is there. We have 16 other goals. Very comprehensive agenda for the world. This is really a to-do list for humanity. So a lot of the work that I've also done in parallel is how do we ensure we have the right amount of resources to get us there. So reformulating the entire financial system, and we did a lot of work there with the UN Environment Program, and we continue to do that work through the Office of the Chief Economist, which, by the way, we've had visit our St. John's classrooms almost every semester. I mean, I'm very lucky. It happens to be a friend, so I tap into my friendships. They say it's better to have friends than to have money. There you go. So made a lot of friends on this journey. And I try to give back to St. John's as much as I can. The students, I know that for them, these are great opportunities to see themselves also working for a better world. So that's really what I try to do every day. And, live the sustainable development goals as a lay professional. But really, the main driver of all of that is my faith, in my case. And I think that's what keeps everything together. I think that's the glue that makes everything make sense. Otherwise, like St. Thomas Aquinas said, it's nothing but straw, right? It's nothing but straw. I mean, there's so many documents, like I said, so many resolutions, but the one thing that binds it together was that very pointed commandment to love one another. And if you ever visit the UN, you'll see one of the first things you see before you're headed to the UN General Assembly is a beautiful painting by Norman Rockwell titled "The Golden Rule." And it's all the religions depicted in there with that common message. So it's a true honor to share my life experience, and I'm happy to answer more questions about my work, of course, as we move along. But thank you so much, Megan, and you're doing wonderful work. St. John's is also happy, and I'm sure very honored to have a second generation of Clarks serving. It's not economics, but still, theology is a topic I highly respect, and I wish I knew more. But maybe I'll learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan. And you beautifully spoke about the influences that some of your professors had along your journey. And it was not planned that it happened to be that the student leaders that were recommended and they were recommended by their peers, that were recommended also happened to be students who have taken your classes, and they are students who are all interested in and on paths to work in the area of global development and sustainability, concerned with moving forward and having social justice be part of not just their personal lives, but their professional ones. I'm going to introduce all of them at once in alphabetical order, and then we'll allow them to respond, ask questions, and see what advice and analysis that they can get from that they want to get from Dr. Chebly. Eryn Banton is a senior global sustainability and development major. She was also one of my students from Philadelphia. She's part of the first class of the bachelor's in global sustainability, and she focuses her studies on environmental justice, economics, and medicine. She's pursuing a minor in Africana studies and looks forward to continuing her educational career. She wants to get an MBA and a JD. Gola is a junior majoring in global development and sustainability. She's the vice president for CRS Ambassadors for Global Justice, and is also involved in Vital, the Social Justice Book Club, and the National Society of Leadership and Success. She's been fortunate enough to go on plunge to Macon, Georgia, lead this past summer's Rondu service experience, and currently is part of the Globe program. She's a Globe manager. She has hopes to pursue a career that includes law school. And Hajra Ilyas is a senior who is a double major in economics and global development and sustainability. Hajra is on the e-board for UNICEF, which has given her multiple opportunities to assist in hosting advocacy events, such as ones for Yemen and Lebanon. Through the Office of Multicultural Affairs, she has been able to facilitate social justice trainings and intergroup dialogue. Hajra is currently working at a nonprofit organization that works to improve the lives of Jamaicans through systemic development in areas of education, healthcare, and economic development. Upon graduation, she hopes to continue working in the nonprofit world to focus on sustainable economic development. So it is my pleasure to turn it over and starting with Eryn and let you all respond and dialogue with Dr. Chebly.
Hey, hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my first question, hi, Dr. Chebly, it's nice to see you again, by the way. So I think something that I often think about when it comes to economic development is the perspective that I have as an American. And even though I'm a minority in this country, I still kind of benefit from a lot of the unjust things that our country has carried out. So when it comes to developing economic development plans, when you create those type of plans for other countries, or when you're trying to, I guess, work with those types of countries, I guess, how do you approach that? Because a lot of the things that we would be trying to fix have been done by America. So if we're trying to restore equity and, build relationships with countries that, are kind of rocky right now, how do you suggest that we take those first steps to doing so?
Should I respond right away, or are we doing yeah, okay. Well, Eryn, thank you thank you for the question. It's wonderful to see you, for sure. And I think that one of the great things about the Sustainable Development Goals is that they have plowed the road for governments to really think a little more holistically. So when we draft economic plans, so when we used to draft economic plans, and I think this was some of the criticism, right criticism to the IMF and other the World Bank and other IFIs back in the 90s, was that it was very unidimensional. We were looking only at output, and then the social backlash, especially in Latin America. I mean, I certainly witnessed that firsthand. Really undermined the entire plan, and at times people were just merely seen as a casualty of the greater good. And if you think about every human being having dignity, then you can't really take that type of approach. So and I think we've made great progress since the 90s. I mean, I think that Amartya Sen winning the Nobel Prize for welfare economics, and the whole global society coming together with these development agendas, I think that's been a great progress. It's slow, but it yields fruits. And one of the latest fruits that we have seen in terms of development plans is that most national development plans are now being drafted with Sustainable Development Goals at the core, including indicators. And we're using that as a framework to leverage international aid and also unlock private investment. So we're understanding, I think, as a global society, that we have to think long term. That green business is good business, and that certainly a country cannot prosper if we have social turmoil, if people are being left behind. So there is something called the integrated national financing frameworks that the UN and the World Bank and the IMF and all sort of working to ensure that countries are able to adopt, obviously customized to their own context, and then sort of like a doc, if you will, for sustainable development finance, and to advance those national development plans that I mentioned, and to be able to work with partners like the US to ensure that the right goals are being met and that we have accountability for international aid so that then we can grow it to finally meet the 0.7% of GNI that was promised by countries back in the 70s, but has never been met. I think there's a handful of countries that help that much, the UK being one of them, the Nordic countries at times, but the US is really fallen short. We are about 0.3% of GNI, so we could do a lot more. One of the good news that I saw this week was that President Biden actually pledged $10 billion for to end hunger, and another extra 100 billion for climate finance. So it seems like we're moving in the right direction. The question that we continuously ask ourselves and when we help governments is, are we doing it fast enough? And what scientists are telling us is at times when it comes to biodiversity and protecting the forests and climate change, unfortunately, we're not. And when it comes to poverty and hunger, COVID really hit us hard, and we're seeing numbers unfortunately go up. So almost 1 billion people under $2 a day, and if you look at multidimensional poverty, about 2 billion, if not more, people. So these are the tools, but the challenges keep mounting. So I hope that answers, Eryn. But I can keep going on.
No, it definitely did. Thank you.
Hajra and then Holly? Or am I messing up the alphabetical order? Maybe it's Holly and then Hajra.
Yeah, I can go first. I just want to say hi, Dr. Chebly. It's nice to see you again. But I really like how in the beginning of your talk, you really emphasized that no one is to be left behind, and you really want to include everyone in the process to be able to participate in environmental goals. And one of the things that it made me think about was it's really hard to work for higher world development goals like sustainability and climate change when people are going hungry, or the country, if half of people are living on less than $2 a day. So I was just wondering what other programs the World Food Program offers for self-sustainability. I know how you mentioned that you guys give meals to schools and things like that, which is amazing. But I was just wondering if you guys also offer programs to help people be able to sustain themselves on their own.
That's a great question, Holly, and it's also nice to see you. How fortunate I am. I'm getting logos here by my former students. No, those are actually great questions, and I just happen to have the answers right in front of me because this is the work I do every day. But seriously speaking, you're right. Leaving no one behind. It has sort of like in our work maybe 3 dimensions in time. Speaking about time frames. So the first work we do is emergency response, humanitarian crises. We have 80 aircraft, and we have boats and trucks. So we're able to deliver food in the most remote places of the earth, where people most need it. And so that's what we're doing in places like South Sudan, in places like Yemen, in places like Tigray in Ethiopia. So we're able to get the job done there, reach those who are basically unreachable. Then after conflict or natural disaster passes, you have sort of what the World Bank would refer to as the recovery phase. So trying to get things back to normal. From a macro perspective, you would think about these as shocks. So we are there to respond to the shock, help recover from the shock. But then one more interesting, this is really the area that I was asked to help with when I joined the World Food Program, is the development side of things. So what happens after the recovery? Like you said, livelihoods, right, jobs, and so on. So, and WFP does have this mandate. We were created thanks to food surpluses from the US, actually. So the US has been a leader in the world. We have to be proud of the good things that come out from the United States, and this is certainly one of them. And at the time, those food surpluses were being wasted, and then they were repurposed to help those in need around the world. But the mandate was also to help make that sustainable, and to help people with their livelihoods. And so we have projects that are development projects where we work with the government. I mean, I have example in Ghana where we're helping the youth to be trained, and then join the government to help survey with the household surveys, and be able to collect data, socioeconomic data for the National Statistics Office, and so on. So it's I think it's 1 million jobs that we're helping the government create for young people. Another example is in Cote d'Ivoire, where we're actually helping connect farmers with e-commerce. And so basically what we're doing there is, helping smaller farmers to become more productive, to have better access to market, to count with better technology, to avoid loss, and try and also preserve some of the sustainable farming practices that they traditionally have employed. So we do have a development portfolio, and we are also part of what is called the UN Development Group, or now the UN Sustainable Development Group, which is the collection of agencies that are focusing on this longer time frame to help governments attain development. I hope that answers, Holly.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So I just wanted to start off by saying your journey and dedication to inclusion and social responsibility, it's all really inspiring, and also all the work you've been able to do at such a young age. That's very impressive. So I wanted to bring up the COVID-19 pandemic because it has it's significantly changed the world and the gap between the developed and the developing world. So I was wondering how you have seen COVID's impact in the work that you do, or how you might have had to adjust your work to factor in the impacts of COVID.
Thank you, Hajra. And yeah, it's been a tough couple of years, that's for sure. I think for everyone on Earth. I mean, I don't think you can find someone who could truly say they haven't been touched by the pandemic in one way or another. So if that's the case for us who are, have been blessed, and we are living in a first world country, with access to the internet and electricity and water, imagine those who, imagine the billion people who don't have access to electricity, 2 billion people don't have access to internet. I mean, that has been truly a big hit. And then if you consider that 60% of the workforce in the world are actually in the informal economy, then you know that for them, the social protection programs have mostly, they're pretty inaccessible to most of them. So it's been tough. It's been really, really tough. I think that if you look at what happened in countries like Peru, in Latin America especially, you had Peru with one of the highest per capita death rates due to COVID. It's lack of sanitation. I mean, we know these are inherent systemic deficiencies that were there that sort of compound the impact of the pandemic. The case of Ecuador, for example. And around the world, you've seen an increase in prices, a significant increase in food prices that is really alarming. And that's the one thing that keeps me up at night is food inflation, and this push for climate change is also necessary, but that unfortunately has that negative spillover in the short run. So, we have to invest more in social protection programs. We have to. There's no choice. We have to ensure that our social protection programs, social policy has good coverage. We need to ensure that they are adequate, that the legislation allows for rights of people and the dignity of people to be protected. We also need these social protection programs to be comprehensive. So we need the social protection floors to be higher, and we need to ensure that it's that it's quality help. I mean, sometimes people need food, sometimes they need cash, sometimes they need education. I mean, it really depends. It's context based, And we need to be responsive. We need to be able to be, we need to be flexible in helping governments. So our role is really to help governments, and governments have struggled. I mean, at times we had governments really asking for WFP to lend their beneficiary back-end platforms to expand social protection. And it's really those countries that didn't have strong systems in place that have struggled the most. And what we've done there is work with international financial institutions to inject a big amount of cash and aid in a very quick way. And I'm very proud to say that last year, the first time that the International Monetary Fund actually gave a grant to a UN agency. Of course, these are government resources, so you have to go through the government, but it went direct. Part of the agreement was that the funds, if there were $20 million went for Liberia, went straight to the World Food Program. And we had another example in Nicaragua. So we're working as trusted advisors to governments and trusted implementers to the international community, where we can ensure accountability where you know the national context is too difficult. So the answer to you is yes, we've seen hunger increase, and at the same time, we hope the international community will rise up to the challenge. We had the G20 meetings convened throughout the year, and luckily we had the Italian presidency. You know, as you know, all the food agencies are based in Rome, so the FAO, the World Food Program, and IFAD. Hunger has been at the center of the debate of the top economies of the world, and more importantly now, during the UN General Assembly, we had a food systems summit, which is not only addressing sustainability of food systems, but also hunger as a main priority, of course. So, you know, these things cannot be seen in silos. You have to look at them together. And the good news is that it is smallholder farmers that hold the key to sustainable farming. You know, so we really have to empower them. We have to invest in them, and we have to ensure that the system is not rigged against them. Because, you know, if they are able to produce food locally, usually this food is more nutritious, has less pesticides, less chemicals. They also can employ more people, and it's really a way to, and it's the first step in economic growth. You know, if you remember economic history, you know, in our class, that's really how the first step is to increase productivity of agriculture and then transcend into industry and so on. So I hope that answers the question, but you know, we can certainly continue the debate. I see we still have time. And, back to you, Hajra.
Before I throw it back to the students, I had a question I wanted to ask, and that is it's a two-pronged question, and one kind of circles back to where you just were. I thought maybe it would be helpful for everybody. I'm curious your thoughts. If anybody doesn't know, the World Food Program won the Nobel Peace Prize last year. And so it seems to me that is something that talks about the role that, you know, that hunger and the work on poverty plays in what does it mean to be more integrated and not quite so siloed. What did you think about, and what was the reaction within the World Food Program of the Nobel Peace Prize win as a statement about sustainable development and the role of your work? The other is building on your last point about local farmers, and also this ties back to Eryn's question about kind of so many of these issues have been caused, whether it's through bad visions of economic development or colonialism or various forms of neocolonialism. What role does the idea of food sovereignty play in how you partner with and support local farmers? The idea that they, you know, not just that they're growing their own crops, but the history of their food and the particular crops and the sense of of not just having enough food, but some degree of sovereignty, sometimes in opposition to some pretty big multinational corporations that don't like when local communities are controlling their own seeds. So I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on those.
Okay, wow, that's the $1 trillion question, right? How do we get food systems right, and what role do those smallholder farmers play? In my view, and I published an article last year on the relationship between how we define economic productivity in the midst of and dawn of automation, and how we look at the labor force given this new conundrum. And for ages we've looked at economic productivity of workers as a product of capital and labor hours. But then when you remove labor out of the equation with AI, what happens, right? So that certainly creates a big problem for the labor force. And if we look at then labor as a positive externality, there's a social good that the markets are not producing enough of, then you have to regulate. You have to harness the market to yield the well-being that we all want. And that's the beauty of economics. It's all about well-being, nothing about profits alone. It's well-being. And whether we the unfortunate part of it is that we have misinterpreted the meaning of well-being. But it's not unique to economics. I mean, if you look at finance, it's all about value, and value doesn't need to equate just to profits. I mean, it can be broader than that. So how do we address that? Well, we need to ensure that our frameworks are because if you ask a company to prioritize social development and to look after the environment at the cost of profits, that's illegal. They can't do that. Fiduciary duty mandates that the principal's responsibility that the agent is due, the agent is actually responsible to maximize profit for the stockholders and the principal. So that's fiduciary duty. And unless you expand on that definition, make it clear that it's about value, not just profit, then we're, corporations are quite tight. And a lot of them are food producers, right? So we need to start there. We need to level the playing field, because sometimes we say, well, it is cheaper to procure commodities in the international markets. But are the cost of production brought as they need to be? In the sense, are those big food producers accounting for the damage they do to the environment, the negative externalities, and so on? And the answer, unfortunately, in most cases, is no. So this lower cost of food by industrial farmers, it comes at the cost of environmental damage and water mismanagement, and in many cases, subsidies. But first, we need to level the playing field. After we've done that, then we would understand that we're not paying a premium for local food production, which is actually healthier in many cases. We're actually even, I would say, competitive if you account for carbon offsets and so on. You see, smallholder farmers in many ways can qualify for carbon offsets. So it becomes competitive. It's still healthy and healthier in many cases. And then on top of that, you don't have to move that food across the Atlantic Ocean, across the Pacific Ocean. So there's something to be said about some figures say that 30% of carbon emissions come from international trade. And when I brought that figure to the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank and the G20 meetings, it was sort of a comment that it was sort of an ironic, if you will, a sarcastic comment about how Trump tariffs were actually good for the environment. And everybody at once really just looked at me, and who is this guy and why is he saying that? And I had a point, I had the point to say that, yeah, sure, trade's great and we need trade, but we also need a price in carbon. And until we account for all the cost of production, that sort of trade benefit is really inflated and not discounted to account for the environmental damage. So I think that's where the key lies, if you were to ask me. And I do envision a world where we have more urban farming and more labor-intensive agriculture in some parts, but in a way that it's you can make a living from. And if we pay more attention to health, we invest more in health, then we would have the amount of we would put public money where it needs to be going, as opposed to maybe subsidizing coal or oil, to this type of endeavors. I do think we have a way of doing this, and I think perhaps Costa Rica is a great example. What they've done with selective farming in the forest, for example, it can be done. So I hope that answers, Megan. But I'm happy to. Again, if there's any disagreement, I love a good friendly debate. I'm not.
Well, I also am attentive to the fact that part of what you have to do working in the area that you do is to engage with these big agriculture companies and what industrial transnational kind of realities look like. But I think that your point about leveling the playing field and about subsidies, some of it's when we think about fossil fuels and the carbon and how that impacts, but some of it too is when we think about the subsidies for something like corn in the United States and how that then ripples and affects the corn production to make tortillas in Mexico or other parts of Central and Latin America. I think I keep coming back, and it's not just because she was my student. I keep coming back to, the underlying Eryn's original question is that there's still, right, like there's still a nexus where it's all related. And in terms of how do we create I don't think a perfect level playing field's ever possible, but something that is where there's not quite so many hurdles in front of poorer countries and who are trying to develop sustainable food that is within, of which they are controlling and have food sovereignty and food justice within their communities. Would Eryn or Holly or Hajra like to ask any other questions?
Yeah, I actually have another question. So I've been researching a lot about poverty in the southwest region of Morocco and how women usually bear the burden of being the most impoverished in those communities. So my research kind of centers around how to create sustainable livelihoods for those people. And so I was kind of wondering how economic development prioritizes certain groups of people, because I know that we're moving towards a global movement, but because there's inequities like we've been talking about among certain groups, how do you create plans that I guess push certain people to the forefront, and how do you do that while also respecting their societal norms that we may possibly like not be used to?
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. And I mean, I think do measure how many, the gender breakdown, and I think it's about 50%. The people we serve are women and girls. So as beneficiaries, we do pay attention to the breakdown. We ensure that children, of course, like I said, if you just one statistic, if you look at the number of children whose education was interrupted due to COVID, we're talking about almost 400 million children. So what did we do there? Well, we ensured that those school meals were able to be delivered to the households. So they were not going to the school, but we were able to deliver the food. And so, we've been flexible in that way to ensure that the most vulnerable are, we're really targeting them. And that's our mission, right? I mean, in an emergency situation, that's really, those are the people who are most in need in the world right now, and that's where we are. That's where you'll find WFP. You will find no one else I mean, maybe some of our partners from time to time, but that's how we operate. So that's really at the core of what we do, and I think that kind of work helps bring people together. It helps to build bridges, to reconcile people, and I think that's why the World Food Program was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that's going back to Megan's question. So high priority youth for us as well. So it's part of our main development portfolio is targeting rural transformation, sustainable infrastructure development, and human capital development. These are the three pillars of our work when it comes to development. And we have cross-cutting targets for youth and for gender. And it's all about respecting the culture, because depending on who you ask, if you ask the UN, sustainable development has three pillars: economic, environmental, and social. If you ask prominent economists like Jeff Sachs, they will tell you that there are four. They will add a political governance aspect. And believe me, we have, the fact there's a governance goal in the SDGs was a hard-fought victory. But because obviously governments do not like, that type of accountability and that type of issue to be raised. But some other governments were. I mean, I can't generalize. But if you ask me, there would be actually 5 dimensions to sustainable development, with culture being the 5th, where development can mean many things to different people, and you have to understand that solutions need to be context appropriate. And this is why the only way to work is bottom up, sort of bottom up with support from the top. You have to have, and that's why I refer to good public policy or sustainable development policy as the enabling environment, because it's really people, civil society, individuals who bring about change. I have this quote in my mind from Mother Teresa, and change starts from within, from yourself, and it's true. I mean, and this smaller farmers, I mean, what I've witnessed is incredible. I've seen young people, women, farmers coming together, form a collective, getting a grant from the EU, help from the OFP, and instead of buying a diesel generator, they're installing solar panels. And but the curious thing is, when I ask them, why solar panels? Are you concerned about climate change? They say, no, it's actually cheaper than diesel, and it breaks down less. So the beauty of all of this is that it's not just the smart thing to do, the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do. And going back to, and I'll stop here. Going back to local food production and food sovereignty. I mean, there is the argument that if we're in the tropics, it doesn't pay to grow maybe certain fruits here, like grapes or maybe apples. Maybe we're better off bringing those from South America, from Chile or from the States. It wouldn't, unless you have hydroponics and so on. The same way it wouldn't pay to try and grow mangoes in Vermont, right? So there's an element, there's a certain truth about the wealth of nations and trade. But there's also studies like that of Hausman and et al. At Harvard University, where they're looking at economic complexity as one of the main key ingredients to growth. So we know that food sovereignty definitely plays a part. And like I said, before we can make a proper assessment, we really have to put a price on carbon. We really have to account for biodiversity loss. We need a system of green accounting, and we're working for that. We're working and helping the UN chief economist and the UN agencies to put a plan to measure green GDP, if you will, adjust the GDP that gives a more accurate view of economic growth vis-a-vis environmental damage. And then, of course, we have the Human Development Index that talks about economic growth and the social aspect of growth, and we have multidimensional poverty indexes. So I think we're getting there, but it's taken a long time because, again, these are complex systems issues that are not just simply that easy to solve, and there's no one size fits all. So you have to focus on the most vulnerable, because these are the target audience that usually falls in within the cracks when things are moving slowly. So that's really our priority.
Thank you. There are two questions that hopefully we can get in. These two questions from the people who are logged on, our attendees, before we run out of time at in the next few minutes. One is, and I'll give you them both. One is coming from your colleague, Dr. Kevorkian. Do you think that we will meet the 2030 goals? Or has COVID pushed us so far back? Is there too much degrowth that you don't think we will meet the 2030 goals? I'd like to add in there, if is there something you think we're closest to meeting? The other question is, and this one is both for Dr. Chebly and for the students, and that is what, combining two questions from the audience, how do you suggest other people connect with partners and get involved in sustainable development? Are there future initiatives and things that you're seeing going on that you would like to see St. John's and St. John's students be involved in? And that I'll open that as well to our student panelists, what might be going on in ways that people who are attending or who will watch this later can get more involved now while they're students, to help be part of the solution and get us to sustainable development.
Sure thing. Thanks, Megan. Thank you for the questions. And, I think the easy one is Dr. Kevorkian's. He's someone I certainly look up to, and I'm sure, there's not much I can teach him. As a matter of fact, I've learned a lot from him, and usually use a lot of his own material, his work in transition economics, his own background. It's just wonderful. And, St. John's is very lucky to have him. So, I think I would like to ask him rather, but, if I were to make my own assessment, when it comes to hunger, we're going backwards, unfortunately. We were in a very positive trend. Most of that was the growth in China in the last 20 years. But now we're seeing a backwards trend, unfortunately. When it comes to the environment, if we look at the Johan Rockström's planetary boundaries framework, we know that in certain cases we already exceeded planetary boundaries. So it might be too late to revert those, especially biodiversity. If a species goes under extinction because of human activity, there's no way to bring them back. I don't know if you've seen the news about the woolly mammoth and whatnot. It's not. That's not the solution, in my view. These species go into extinction because we deplete their ecosystems, and an ecosystem is not something you can put together. It took the Earth billions of years, and evolution, millions of years for the rainforest to be what it is and to have that type of diversity. So once we chop it, it's never coming back. That's something that we've lost forever. When it comes to climate change, what the IPCC report just told us is it might be too late to keep it under 1.5 degrees. So that goal we might not necessarily achieve. What we can do is minimize the damage and be able to adapt to the new world that our children will be living on. So if you think about all of our infrastructures built on a world with 300 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and it's been 10,000, it's like 100,000 years that we've had that, even before humans. I think it was the dinosaurs the last time we had the current level of carbon on the atmosphere. Please indulge me, I'm clearly not a climate scientist, but we've never seen, the Earth, humans have never lived in this type of conditions that we have now. So it's really dangerous because all of our infrastructure is not built for that. We might have dams that might be useless. And at the same time, we have rain in the desert where we have no infrastructure to cope with that. So, make a long story short, I think we're not on track, and there are some goals that we might not completely achieve. And the beauty of the SDGs is that they will not be achieved unless, I mean, we will not claim success unless all of them are achieved for every country. So that's really what leaving no one behind really means. So it's really hard in that sense, really ambitious, if you will. But at the other side of the coin would be, as my friend Jana Altus Bertrand says, it's too late to be pessimistic. And when we look at the money, how much we need to get us there, if you think of that, only 5% of military spending will get us there. You know, it's just that, sure, it's ambitious, but we do have the means, we do have the technology. That to answer that question. I'm so sorry, but I kind of forgot. I kind of forgot the second question. Oh, for partners. How do we? Okay, so when I realized this outrageous figure of 5%, and I was working on the financing the Agenda 2030, I started a global campaign coming from the campaigning side of UNDP. I realized that and I'm sorry, that's my wife just bumping up in the background there. You can say hi, everyone. But you know, we realized that it was totally doable. We only needed 5%, so somebody needs to bring this message to these forums. What I saw was civil society sort of shooting for the low-hanging fruit, trying to combat illicit capital flight back in 2015 in Addis, where this integrated national financial frameworks I mentioned before, where they were agreed by the international community. The civil society was lobbying for, oh, we need to combat illicit capital flight, and you know, Apple has billions stored in Ireland and this and that, and they're cheating. So, and I said, sure. I mean, that's you'd want that to happen, but governments are already pushing for that. So why not focus on something else? And I brought this whole, I wrote a paper on it, and when I saw that people were scared of talking, you know, and every time I mentioned this, I would get a standing ovation. You know, it's like ECOSOC the ECOSOC building in the UN, 500 people. The minute I said military span, even finished my sentence, everybody is standing up, and I was like, well, you know, who doesn't like a standing ovation? But you know, for a good cause, because we do have the means, as long as we invest more in peace. So I started that campaign, and the one thing I realized, it would be really hard to get 194 countries to commit. I mean, I got Costa Rica to pledge, but they already have no army, right? Then I lobbied, and you know, it's funny because that was a UN official lobbying countries. You're not supposed to do that. Please don't tell anybody. And then I spoke to Kazakhstan, and they were like, yeah, we'll pledge 1% to the UN SDG fund. But and then I said, okay, great. Let's make it happen. I brought them together with the SDG fund, and I was like, well, we'll do it when every country does it. So then I knew, okay, well, this is an uphill battle. But I kept the message going, brought it to St. John's. I figured, you know, it would be a student-led organization, would be better than if it was me. And what I realized is that it's become a fantastic platform for young people to be able to get experience and be able to interact with the world of the UN, where it is really hard sometimes to have the UN be your first job. You know, it's really hard because even internships, they ask you to be enrolled in a master's program. So sometimes NGOs, and we partner with several NGOs, but the campaign has really been a platform for that. And a lot of the alumni have ended up working, you know, in the EU mission in New York. I have another colleague who's worked for the Nature Conservancy Group, and, you know, advancing at very senior levels. So hopefully we'll be at a time where we can ask for favors back. But, you know, that's really, I think, the main platform I recommend. But, you know, there's always, you know, those NGOs that work closely with the UN. We know that we can't do it all everywhere. So we do rely on partners like Caritas, for example. Caritas has been, you know, for the World Food Program, a wonderful ally. The Red Cross, for example. And these are great places where you can work, you can build experience, and you know, also know that you can start in the private sector, you can also start in academia, and then you can transition. It doesn't have to be right off the bat. I mean, you know, so Yeah, I hope that answers those two questions.
Thank you. What to our student leaders, do you have any suggestions for students who what's going on campus that people can get involved in, and that's where we'll end with your advice for students who what's going on campus. What would you suggest that they do? I know that the CRS Ambassadors is one organization, but I want to give each of you a minute to say, what would you suggest to your fellow students to get involved, both on campus and in New York?
I can speak really quick. Yeah, I was gonna say I can't speak to the magnitude that is the UN, but more relatively on campus. Obviously, I'm heavily involved with CRS, and that's just joining clubs is probably your best first stop in searching for others that are willing to help or like-minded with you. And CRS was the first club that I had joined on campus. And you really get to meet like-minded people from the St. John's community, which is great, and then take it a step further outside to New York. And they're like, this week, our president had found this climate strike march, and now we're taking a group of students on Friday to go, and hopefully we'll get to collab with them and meet new people there. But yeah, joining clubs is probably like your first step. And if you have any questions about CRS or anything, you can always ask me.
Going off of what Holly said, I definitely agree. I think joining clubs is probably one of the best ways to get involved. I'm part of UNICEF. UNICEF is always throwing advocacy events. It's also like joining these clubs with like-minded people is also just such a great way to network. And like networking is really what like build up your professional life and gives you more opportunities. Like for example, the internship I'm currently at, it was introduced to me by someone I met at UNICEF. So, you know, it all works out.
Yeah, so I third it. I definitely agree with what they said. I also would probably challenge you to join clubs with people who aren't necessarily like-minded, because that's what it really exposes the issues and things that you may end up being passionate about. You know, you might join a club where things seem to be like-minded, but the thing that you might be passionate about will be elsewhere. Also, depending on how flexible your schedule is with school and how many electives you have, I would encourage you to probably take classes that center around that and just have outside of class discussions with your professors. I know in Dr. Chebly's class, we had to type up an economic development plan in the fall semester that I took him. And I ended up writing one for Qatar. And because I have little exposure to the Middle East and, you know, like how their economic politics kind of works, you know, he was kind enough to go out of class and talk to me about how that stuff kind of works and how that develops. And now that's something that I'm interested in. And, you know, it has led me to ask questions about what their economic development plans look like and how climate change will eventually, you know, affect their economies and the people who live in those types of countries. So I think that's another way. Definitely like use your professors. I think a lot of them are really passionate about what they teach. And if you can tailor your interests to what is being taught in your classes, that's helped me a lot.
This is all excellent advice, and it reminds me of our another alumni speaker who spoke in the freshman convocation and talked about not discounting the networking that happens among your peers, right? And so it is about your network with your professors, and over time they may become your peers, but that the ways in which and the people and the perspectives he had met through the various friendships that he made among other students while he was at St. John's, and how that led to opportunities and led to ways in which he was able to make connections he wouldn't have had otherwise. And I will say, as somebody who looks at issues of global development from a different angle and engages with the UN from a different angle, these are all ways that a very overwhelming topic and a very overwhelming global structure starts to seem less overwhelming, and you start to see where your place can fit and where you can fit in. It was, you know, it took a while for me to go from, you know, an intern with an NGO when I was just before a freshman in college at the UN to figuring out, okay, I wanted to engage as an academic. And your peers are a big part of that negotiation. We have a question that's not a question. I know we are out of time, but before we end, there was a request that students, it can be hard for students to look up other students. And so there was a request if the students are willing to post their Instagram handle or however, or email in the chat. And so if you are comfortable doing that, that comes from another professor at St. John's and her students. I want to, as we end, say thank you, a very deep thanks to everyone who attended, to all three of our wonderful student panelists. And as always, we are immensely grateful to Dr. Juan Chebly and his continued willingness to share his time and his talent and his wisdom with our students and all of us at St. John's. Thank you very much to all of you. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful afternoon and that all of the things that Dr. Chebly mentioned remain in the forefront of those meeting this week at the General Assembly, and that they too insist that nobody be left behind. Please keep an eye out for our information for our next event, which will be October 26th, which will focus on a panel discussing rising nationalism with scholars from Nigeria, the Philippines, and an Algerian American who's Professor Azzedine here at St. John's. Thank you and have a good afternoon.